The klaxon on the tower had been going for 4 minutes when my brother told the guards to put me on the ground. It was 11:04 in the morning at Yuma Proving Ground, and the board outside range control read 108 degrees. The asphalt gave off a shimmer you could see through, like bad glass. Somewhere behind me, a helicopter sat in a hover at 60 feet with a rescue litter swinging under it, and the rotor wash was throwing grit into my teeth. 2 Department of Defense police officers stood in front of me. The younger one had his palm out. The older one had his hand resting on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough that he wanted me to notice. My brother Marcus was pointing at me from 12 feet away, close enough that I could see the sweat rings on his $400 shirt. "She is not cleared to be here," he said. "She has a history. She was separated for psychiatric reasons, and she has been harassing this family for years. She is a danger to this demonstration," he said it loud. He said it in front of a 1-star general, a congressional staffer, 2 vendor reps from Huntsville, and a man in a gray polo shirt whose name none of them had bothered to learn. Every word of it was false, not exaggerated, false. And the thing that hollowed me out was not that my brother said it. It was that he believed it. He had been fed that story for 14 years by the same woman who was standing 8 feet behind him in linen and pearls, saying nothing at all. "Ma'am," the younger officer said, his name tape read Ruiz. He looked about 24. "I need you to keep your hands where I can see them." "Do you have a badge?" I did have a badge. Here is what none of them knew yet, including my brother, including my mother, including the general who was already looking at his watch. That helicopter could not set that load down without a release from range control. Range control could not issue a release without the government test director. And the airspace window for the day closed in 9 minutes. My brother had just had the government test director detained on his own test. "It is in my left chest pocket," I told Officer Ruiz. My voice came out flatter than I expected. "I would rather you take it out than me." He reached forward. His fingers found the lanyard. He pulled it into the light, and I watched his eyes move across it once, and then again, slower. The way people read a word they were sure they had misread. Behind him, my mother finally spoke. "Let them take her," Evelyn Vance said. She has done this before. She had never done this before. Not once in 45 years. But my mother had spent 14 years building a woman who would. And today, in 108 degrees, with a load hanging over a hot range, that woman was finally going to be introduced to everyone. If you have ever had your own family tell a story about you that was not true, and watched other people believe it, because the person telling it loved you on paper, type "I know that story" in the comments and subscribe. This one takes a while to turn. Stay with me. It turns all the way over. My name is Sarah Vance. I am 45 years old. I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, and my job is not to sell anything. My job is to find out whether the thing somebody is selling will hold. To my family, that has never been a job. It has been an embarrassment with a pension. My mother built Vance Larkin Aerospace out of my grandfather's machine shop in Erie, and by the time I was in high school, there was a lobby with a wall of photographs in it. My brother Marcus is 7 years younger than me. He is the president now. My mother is the chairman. They are both on that wall. Mine used to be there too. There was a picture of me at 19 in dress greens, taken the week I finished basic. It hung between a shot of the Erie plant and a framed purchase order. It came down the spring I turned 32, and nobody in my family has ever once mentioned that it was removed. That is the part people who have normal families cannot hear correctly. They imagine a fight. There was never a fight. There was an absence that got a little bigger every year, and a story that got a little cleaner every time it was told, until the story was smooth enough to be repeated at fundraisers. The story went like this. Poor Sarah, she had a hard time overseas. She was involved in something terrible. She was not well afterward, and the army let her go, and she has never really recovered, and Evelyn has been so patient with her. Every sentence in it was built out of a true fact bent 40 degrees. I had been overseas. I had been involved in something terrible. I was not well afterward, and my mother had been extremely patient, in the way a person 'tis patient with a fire they started and are waiting to see burn out. I want to be honest about my own part, because I have had a long time to think about it, and I am too old to tell you a version where I only stand still and glow. I let it stand. For 14 years I let my mother's version be the only version in the room, and I told myself it was discipline. It was not discipline. It was that her version gave what happened a reason, and the reason was me, and some part of me needed there to be a reason more than I needed to be innocent. You cannot understand the range, or the guards, or the 9 minutes, without a night 14 years ago, a woman named Naomi Pike, and a gray plastic bin on a shelf in Maryland that nobody opened for 14 years. I was a staff sergeant then, flight paramedic on an air ambulance crew, which meant that when somebody's worst night was happening, we were the ones who flew into it. That night we were called to a ridge in eastern Afghanistan for a soldier with a pelvic fracture and a bad hour behind him. The landing zone was a boulder field on a 40-degree slope. There was nowhere to put the aircraft, so we hoisted. I was on the hoist controls. Naomi went down on the cable with the litter. Naomi Pike was 33, from Dayton, Ohio, and she was the only person in my adult life who ever gave me a nickname that stuck. She called me Preacher because I read the checklist out loud like a sermon and would not skip a line for anybody, including a colonel. She used to say that if the aircraft ever went down, she wanted me on the controls because I was too rigid to panic. She had the patient secured, and I was bringing them up. 50 feet, 40 feet, there was a sound I have spent 14 years failing to describe. Not a snap, a knock. One hard knock, like somebody hitting a pipe with a wrench once, and then the load on my hands went away. The cable drum coupling on that hoist had sheared at the keyway. I got a burn from wrist to elbow, and another one across the left side of my neck, from grabbing what was left of a moving cable, which is what your hands do before your brain arrives. I still have both. The one on my neck is the one my mother has asked me, twice, to cover at events. Naomi and that soldier did not come home. The investigation took 11 months. I gave 4 statements. I told them about the knock. I told them the load was inside limits, that the cable payout was inside limits, that I had run the checklist out loud like a sermon. The finding, when it came, said that the failure was consistent with dynamic overload, and that the crew had contributed. It cited hoist operator technique. It cited an improperly secured litter attachment. Improperly secured. That was Naomi. That was her name in a federal record, next to a mistake she did not make, forever. And it was my name, too, on the technique line, and I have never known which of the 2 of those I would trade away if somebody let me trade only one. There was a piece of that coupling in an evidence bin in a materials lab in Maryland. There is a rule that you retain the lot samples. Nobody ever cut it. Nobody ever put it a scope, because 11 months after the accident, the deficiency report that would have required it was withdrawn. I wrote that deficiency report, product quality deficiency report, the actual form, filed 23 days after the accident, naming the part number, the lot, the failure mode, and the vendor. The vendor was Vance Larkin Aerospace, part number VL4471. My mother's company built the coupling that killed my friend. I did not file that report to hurt my family. I want to be clear, because later on a lot of people ask me that in a lot of different tones. I filed it because a part failed and other crews were flying with the same part, and there is a form for that, and I am the kind of person who fills out the form. I called my mother the night before I submitted it. I thought I was being decent. I thought I was giving her time to get ahead of it. She was quiet for a while, then she asked me one question. Are you certain, Sarah? Because if you are wrong, you will have ended 400 jobs in Erie over a bad night. I said I was certain. Then you have already decided, she said, that your version of a bad night is worth more than everyone else's whole life. She did not yell. My mother has never once raised her voice at me. She simply set a weight down on the table and walked away from it and let me carry it. 11 months later, the report was withdrawn. I did not know. That is the part that sounds impossible until it happens to you. The system does not send you a letter that says the thing you built is gone. There is no notification. A withdrawal is a piece of administrative paper that closes a file, and closed files do not announce themselves. What I knew was that the finding came out blaming us, and that the part number never appeared in it, and that when I asked why, a warrant officer at the safety center told me kindly that the deficiency report had been resolved and the vendor had provided a corrective response. What happened between those two things was my family. 3 weeks after I filed, my mother flew to Fort Campbell. She brought Marcus, who was 24 then, and did whatever she told him. She brought a family friend named Lowell Hines, who is a psychiatrist in Cleveland and who had not seen me since I was in high school. They took me to lunch at a place with wooden booths, and they told me they were worried. I was not well, that was true. I was sleeping about 3 hours a night, and I had stopped eating things that required a plate. My hands shook. I heard that knock in the shower, in traffic, in the pause before people answered a question. Dr. Hines told me gently that grief can generate what he called a persecutory frame. That when we cannot accept a random loss, we will build a villain, because a villain is easier to survive than randomness. He said it kindly. He said it with a hand on my forearm, on the side with the burn. And here is what nobody understands about a lie that good. It fit. I did want a villain. I did want the knock to mean something. I sat in that booth and I felt the ground go soft under the only solid thing I had, which was my own account of 40 seconds. I did not fight them. I let them take me to a follow-up appointment. There is a letter from that appointment, on Dr. Hines's letterhead, describing a patient with unresolved traumatic grief and impaired reality testing. It was never a diagnosis from a military provider. It never entered my medical record, it never had to. My mother did not need it for the army. She needed it for the family, and for the board, and for one afternoon in a lawyer's office in Erie. I stayed in the army. Full duty, no flags. And eventually a commission at 33, with constructive credit for the years I had already served, and a career I built quietly in a lane my family found so boring they never asked about it. Test and evaluation, the people who take a thing a company promises and hang weight on it until it either holds or it does not. But the story had already left the house by then, and it was living on its own. Sarah had a breakdown. Sarah was separated. Sarah is not well. At my nephew's baptism, my mother introduced me to a bishop as my daughter, who is between things. At Thanksgiving, when I came straight from a 14-hour drive, still in a flight suit because I had gone straight from a hangar, she met me at the door and told me not to bring that hospital smells into her house, because the Halloran people were coming. I went and sat in my truck for 2 hours in the cold, and then I drove home. I did not say a word. 14 years of not saying a word. Because here is the thing I have never told anyone until this. If my mother was right about me, then Naomi died of an accident. If my mother was wrong about me, then Naomi died of a part, and the part came from us. And I had been eating Christmas dinner off the money that part paid for. Being crazy was cheaper. 11 months before Yuma, an email came in through the official channel with the subject line "Hoist Anomaly question." It was from a sergeant named Rowan Diaz, 26 years old, a crew chief at Fort Rucker who had never met me. He said his unit had 2 hoists come back from a maintenance test flight with the same odd wear pattern at the keyway. He said his warrant told him to go find the last person who wrote it up. Diaz had done the thing that takes 10 minutes and that almost nobody does. He had searched the deficiency archive by part number. He attached a screenshot. I looked at it on my phone standing in a parking garage in Alabama, with a bag of groceries melting in my other hand, and I saw my own report, and I saw the status field, and the status field said withdrawn by originator. And then I saw the signature block on the withdrawal memo. It said Sarah E. Vance. I do not have a middle name. My mother did not give me one. She has told the story at dinner parties for 40 years, how she was so certain I would be a boy, that she only had one name ready, and how she liked the plainness of it and never bothered to add anything. It is one of her charming stories. She tells it well. Whoever signed my name to that memo had picked an initial out of the air, because a full military signature block usually has 3 parts, and a form looks wrong without one. I stood in that garage for a long time. I want to describe what that was because it was not triumph. Everybody imagines that moment as vindication, and it is not. It is closer to grief. Because in 1 second, I got back a thing I had thrown away, which was my own account of 40 seconds, and the price of getting it back was understanding exactly how much of my life I had spent apologizing for being right. I sat down on the concrete between 2 cars. The ice cream was ruined. I remember thinking about that with great seriousness for maybe a full minute, because the rest of it was too big to pick up yet. Then I did 3 things. I did not call my mother. I did not call a reporter. I did not drive to Erie. I filed a complaint with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service hotline, and I attached the screenshot, and I wrote 4 paragraphs with no adjectives in them. I submitted a records request for the original withdrawal memo, the routing sheet, and the notary log from the vendor's quality office for that month. And I sent an email to a materials lab in Maryland asking 1 question. Do you still hold the retained lot samples for part number VL4471, lot 09-114? They did, in a gray plastic bin on a shelf, for 14 years, because the report that would have required somebody to cut it had been withdrawn by a woman with a middle initial who did not exist. 4 months later, a program came across my desk that I had already read about in a trade magazine. The Army was replacing the rescue hoist on the entire medevac fleet. $2.4 billion over 10 years. 2 competitors had made it to the operational test phase, and one of them was Vance Larkin Aerospace, and the marketing package had a photograph of my brother standing in front of a hangar with his arms crossed. Later on, a lot of people wanted to believe I engineered that day. I did not. What I did was walk down a hallway and hand my whole career to a lawyer. I disclosed in writing, that same afternoon, to my directorate and to the legal advisor. I named my mother, I named my brother, I named a 14-year-old accident. Then I sat in a folding chair outside an office, while a man I had met exactly twice decide whether I would ever work again. He recused me from source selection. I never saw a price. I never scored a proposal. I have still never seen what my brother's company bid on that program, and I never will. What he left me was operational test director, and the difference between those 2 jobs is the whole story. Source selection decides who gets the money. A test director cannot award a contract to anyone. A test director cannot take one away either. A test director can do exactly one thing. A test director can decide that what just happened was not a test. Nobody in my family knew I had that job. I want to be honest about that too. It was not strategy. There was nobody to tell. My mother and I had not spoken in 19 months, and the last thing Marcus had sent me was a group text about a golf tournament that he immediately followed with "sorry, wrong thread." So for 4 months, I knew something my brother did not, and I want to be honest about how that felt, because it did not feel like a weapon in my hand. It felt like a countdown I had not started and could not stop. I flew into Yuma 4 days early because that is what you do. You walk the range, you check the instrumentation. You sit in a metal building with the test team, and you go through the run matrix line by line until everybody is bored, because bored is the correct feeling in a test. 3 days before the demonstration, an envelope came to my hotel from the materials lab. The fracture surface on that 14-year-old coupling had beach marks. Concentric arcs at the keyway root, that is fatigue. That is a crack that had been growing for a long time before that night, cycle after cycle, until the last cycle finished it. The corrective response Vance Larkin had filed after my report was withdrawn described the failure as ductile overload consistent with an external dynamic event. Those 2 documents cannot both be true. One of them is metal and one of them is a sentence. The morning of the demonstration, I was up at 4. Yuma at 4 in the morning is the only hour of the day that is honest. The desert holds cold like it is embarrassed about it, and there is a smell of creosote and jet fuel, and the sky is that green you only get before it decides to be brutal. I wore civilian clothes. Gray slacks, gray shirt, boots, no insignia. I do that on purpose at contractor demonstrations, and I have done it my entire career. When a vendor sees a lieutenant colonel walk in, the vendor performs. When a vendor sees a woman with a clipboard, the vendor relaxes, and a relaxed vendor shows you what they actually built. On my left hand I wore a titanium band. Naomi machined it out of a scrap test coupon in the shop at Bagram on a slow night. 3 of them, one for each of us on the crew, and she handed them out like she had bought us cars. She said, "Wear it, it is stronger than we are." On my left wrist I wore her watch. A black G-Shock resin cracked at the 11 o'clock lug. It runs. I have replaced the battery 4 times. At the badge trailer there was a line, and I stood in it, and a man in a gray polo shirt in front of me turned around and asked if I knew whether the observer tent had coffee. I told him it had coffee and no shade. He said that was the correct order of priorities. He had a soft Missouri accent and a laminated visitor badge with a first name on it, Curtis, and I thought nothing about him at all. The badge clerk scanned my common access card, printed my credential, and clipped it inside a red plastic sleeve. Red is not a rank. Red is a zone. It meant I was authorized inside the controlled area during an active test, which at that range that day was about 11 people out of 140. I put it in my left chest pocket and let the lanyard hang, because at 4:50 in the morning, nobody is reading anything. Marcus found me at 6:10 by the coffee urns. He looked good. He always looks good. He has our mother's ability to appear rested in a way that reads as moral. Sarah. He stopped about 4 feet away, the distance you use for a coworker. Wow, okay. What are you doing here? Working. He smiled with only the bottom half of his face. Doing what? Notes, he laughed, actual relief in it. Right, sure, VA thing? Somebody's advocacy group? He was already scanning past my shoulder to see who was watching us. Look, that's great, that's really great. Just, hey. There's a lot of brass here today. General Culp is here. We've got 2 people from the Hill. If you could kind of stay by the water tent, that would be a huge help to me. I said, you don't want me in the sight line. I want today to go well, he said. For all of us. Mom's here. That was wave 1, and I need you to see how small it was, because it is always this small at the start. A man asks his sister to stand somewhere else. It is deniable. He would tell you he was being practical. He might even believe it. But that request had a shape, and I had seen the shape my whole life. Stand where you cannot be introduced, I said. Sure. And I meant it, for a completely different reason than he thought. Because I did not want a demonstration run for my benefit. I wanted the demonstration run for their benefit. I wanted them relaxed. I wanted them to show me what they had actually built. My mother arrived at 7:40 in an air-conditioned Suburban with a brigadier general. Evelyn Vance is 72 years old and moves like the room already agreed. She had linen the color of bone, and she was carrying a folder she did not need. She looked at me for less than a second, and then she was past me, and I heard her say to General Culp, in that low, warm voice she uses when she wants a fact to sound like a kindness. That's my daughter. She's had a very hard road. It means so much that she came out to support Marcus. The general looked at me with the face people make when they have been handed a small tragedy and do not have anywhere to set it down. That was wave 2, and it is the one that costs, because it was public and it was material. It did not just insult me, it installed a version of me in the head of the senior officer on the range before I opened my mouth, so that anything I said afterward would arrive already explained. If somebody in your own family has ever introduced you to a stranger in a way that quietly closed a door before you could open your mouth, hit the like button and put the word earacid in the comments. I want to know how many of us there are. 9 minutes later, Marcus improved on it. I know the exact time because the range log has it. At 7:51 in the morning, Marcus Vance approached the badge trailer and asked the clerk to reissue my credential as a family guest, on the grounds that I was not with the government party and had gotten a red sleeve by error. The clerk, whose name is Angela Pruitt, and who has worked at that trailer for 19 years, told him she could not reissue a credential on a verbal request from a vendor. He asked her twice more. She wrote it down. She wrote all of it down, including the time, because that is what you do at a badge trailer. and that piece of paper became Government Exhibit 4. The first run went at 8:40. I want to describe it fairly, because it was beautiful. It was genuinely beautiful. Their aircraft came in over the wash, flared, settled into a hover, and the hoist paid out clean and smooth with almost no pendulum on the litter. The operator was good. The engineering was good. My brother's company has some very fine engineers, and they had built a very fine machine, and none of what follows is their fault. Marcus narrated it to the general with a headset mic and a laser pointer. He was good at it. He is good at that. 11,000 cycles on this coupling family, he said, with 0 failures. 0. That's not marketing, sir. That's the log. I wrote that down word for word. I underlined it once. Then I walked around the tail of the aircraft on the second hold, with a Defense Contract Management Agency quality rep named Hal Bergeron, who has the personality of a filing cabinet and who I would trust with my life. I stopped at the drum housing and read the data plate. The serial ended in -R7. The article we had bench tested at Aberdeen in March. The one in the configuration audit, the one that all of the qualification data on that screen belonged to, ended in -P3. I said quietly, Hal, is that the article we ran in March? Bergeron looked at the plate for a long time. Then he pulled up the configuration record on his tablet, and I watched a man who does not have expressions get one. An R suffix can be innocent. It can be a refurbished unit, and refurbished units get used at demonstrations all the time. That is exactly why nobody had blinked at it. That is exactly why I did not say the other thing out loud yet. Because an R suffix can also mean a hand-built engineering article. A one-off, machined to tolerance by a senior technician over 3 weeks, with a finish you cannot hold in production. The difference between those two things is the difference between a company that is proud and a company that is committing a felony, and at 9:20 in the morning, I did not know which one my brother was. Bergeron said, Ma'am, the configuration record shows P3 on the aircraft. Okay, I said. I keyed the radio and I called a test hold. A test hold is not a scandal. It is a normal word. It means stop the clock. The government has a question. It happens on ranges every week of the year, and most of the time the answer is boring. But a hold at 9:20, on a day whose only lift window closed at 11:13, with a general in a folding chair and a congressional staffer taking pictures for her boss, is a thing that gets noticed. Marcus came around the tail of that aircraft at a speed I had not seen from him since he was 14. What are you doing? Asking a configuration question, I said. To who, Sarah? Sarah, he put his hand on my elbow. He has never in his life put his hand on my elbow. You cannot be back here. This is a hot area. Do you understand what you are doing right now? Do you understand what today is? I do, I said. Take your hand off my arm. He took it off. And then he looked at Hal Bergeron, and Hal Bergeron looked back at him with a filing cabinet's face, and my brother made the single worst decision of his life in about 4 seconds. He could have said, my sister is asking about the serial number. Any adult would have said that. If he had said that, at worst his program takes a 30-day slip and a quality finding, and he keeps his company, and he keeps his mother, and he keeps a version of the next 20 years that has a Christmas in it. Instead, he turned around and walked toward the observer line, and he raised his voice so that everybody under that tent could hear him. Range control. I need security at the aircraft. There's an unauthorized individual in the controlled area. That was wave 3, and it was the only one he could not take back because it went out on a net that keeps a log. And then, because the story was right there where it had always been, warm and ready and 14 years old, he reached for it. She is my sister. She is not right. She was separated for psychiatric reasons. She has been harassing this family for years, and she is not cleared to be here. The klaxon went. The aircraft, which was already coming back inbound with a load, went into a hold pattern at 60 feet because a hold with a load under it is the one thing you do not rush. And that is where you came in. 2 Department of Defense police officers, 108 degrees. My hands where Officer Ruiz could see them, and my mother 8 feet behind my brother in bone linen. Choosing. She had about 3 seconds to say the true sentence. That is all it would have taken. Marcus, stop. What she said was, let them take her. She has done this before. Officer Ruiz pulled the lanyard out of my chest pocket. He read it twice. Then he did something that I have thought about many times since, because he was 24 years old and nobody had prepared him for it. He did not gasp. He did not step back. He rotated the badge 90 degrees so his partner could see it, and he said one word. Dwyer. The older officer came over, read it, and said, in a completely different voice than the one he had been using for the last 4 minutes, ma'am. I apologize. Do you want to proceed to range control, or do you want them to come to you? I said, I will go to them. Nobody touches anything on that aircraft. There was no salute. I want to say that clearly because I have watched people tell this story back to me wrong. Nobody snapped to attention on a hot range in front of a hovering aircraft. That is not what happens. What happens is much quieter and much worse for the person it happens to. What happens is that the room reorganizes around you without a sound, and the man who was pointing at you 30 seconds ago is now standing alone in the middle of it. If your family ever had one sentence to tell the truth about you, and they did not take it, type no in the comments. If they did, type yes. I read everyone. Range control put it on the net so the aircraft could hear it, because the aircraft needed to know who owned the decision. All stations, Yuma Range Control. Test hold is confirmed at the direction of the government test director, Lieutenant Colonel Vance. The pilot's voice came back over the speaker in the tent, flat and bored and Texan, the way pilots are when they want everybody to calm down. Copy range control, test director's hold, will hold. I heard my brother say, what? It was not a question to anyone. It came out of him the way air comes out of something. General Culp stood up. She is a small woman with reading glasses on a cord, and she did not raise her voice either. Mr. Vance, she said, you just called security on my test director. I did not know, that is worse, the general said. Sit down, they set the load. It took 11 minutes, which felt like a very long time, and everyone in that tent watched it come down inch by inch in silence with the klaxon still going. And I stood at the edge of the pad with Naomi's watch on my wrist and counted the descent the way I have counted every hoist for 14 years. Then I walked into the range control shelter with Hal Bergeron, General Culp, the program office lead, and the man in the gray polo shirt, who took a credential case out of his back pocket and introduced himself properly for the first time. Special Agent Curtis Mabry, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. He had been on that range since Tuesday. He was not there because I called him that morning. He was there because 11 months earlier a hotline complaint had crossed a threshold, and because the metallurgy report from a gray plastic bin in Maryland had gone to his office 3 days before it went to my hotel. What he told me later in a hallway was that he had flown to Yuma expecting to close the file. A prosecutor had already read the withdrawal memo and told him the thing prosecutors tell you about paper that old. 14 years is not a case, 14 years is a story. What he needed was an act. Something that happened that morning, in front of federal witnesses, on a recording, by a man who was an officer of the company today and not 14 years ago. My brother handed him one at 11:04 in the morning on an open net in front of a general. That is the part I could not have planned and did not plan. I brought a question about a serial number. He brought 14 years. My brother put us in the same room by calling security, and then he said the sentence that turned a closed file into a charge. The air conditioner in that shelter rattled like something loose in a dryer. There were 4 folding chairs and a coffee maker with a burned pot on it. My mother came in without being asked. She sat down and put her folder on her knees and said, I think everyone needs to take a breath. My daughter has a documented history. Ma'am, Agent Mabry said, I would prefer you didn't say anything else in here. I laid 3 things on the table. The first was the configuration record with the P3 serial, and the data plate photograph Hal Bergeron took with a government camera, showing R7. Which meant every hour of qualification data on the screen behind my brother's laser pointer belonged to a different piece of hardware than the one that had just flown. Not a mistake. Nobody hand carries the wrong hoist to a demonstration. The second was the withdrawal memo, 14 years old. 2 paragraphs, signed Sarah E. Vance. I said I don't have a middle name. General Culp looked up at me over the reading glasses. Say that again. I have no middle name. It is not on my birth certificate. It is not in my record. It has never been on any document I have signed in 26 years of service. Whoever wrote that memo needed a signature block that looked complete. The third thing was the metallurgy report on the retained sample from lot 09-114, and the corrective action response my mother's company filed in the same month the report was withdrawn. Beach marks at the keyway route, fatigue, a crack that had been growing for months. The company's response said ductile overload from an external dynamic event, which is a technical way of saying the crew jerked it. Agent Mabry read all of it without changing expression. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Who had access to file a withdrawal on a government form on your behalf? And that is when my mother did the thing I did not expect, and it is the reason I have never been able to make this story into a clean one. She did not defend herself, she did not deny it. She turned her head, unhurried, and she said, Marcus handled the vendor quality file that year. I watched my brother's face. I have spent a lot of hours since then trying to decide what I felt in that half second, and the honest answer is that I felt nothing yet, and then I felt something I did not want, which was pity. Because Marcus was 38 years old, and he had just found out, in a metal shed, in front of a general, that he was not the golden one. He was the one who could be spent. He said, I was 24. You were an officer of the company, my mother said. Mom. His voice broke on it, which is a sound I had not heard from him since our father's funeral. Mom, I signed what you put in front of me, Agent Mabry said, Mr. Vance, stop talking. Nobody in that room said the word forgery out loud that day, because it was Tuesday, and because that is not how any of this actually works. What happened was that a federal agent collected 3 documents into an evidence sleeve, and the general suspended the demonstration. And the program office issued a written stop work that afternoon. And at 4:40 in the afternoon, the government took possession of the hoist that had flown. 14 years for the sentence, 1 afternoon for the paperwork. They did not put my brother in handcuffs on the range. I know that is the ending everybody wants, and I have stopped wanting it. The Justice Department took 22 months, false statements. Major fraud against the United States. Marcus took a plea and got 18 months and a debarment that will outlive his career. My mother got probation and a fine her insurance covered because a woman who is very good at not putting her name on things has an easier time in court than the man who signed what she put in front of him. Vance Larkin Aerospace was suspended, then sold in pieces. The Erie plant is still open under a different name, with about 260 of the 400 jobs. I have thought about that number. It is the number my mother handed me on the phone 14 years earlier, and I have decided I am allowed to set it down now because I did not close that plant. She built it on a coupling she knew was cracking. Here is the part that took the longest and that no camera was there for. 14 months after Yuma, the Army Combat Readiness Center amended the finding on the accident. It is a very boring document, 2 pages. It removes the words improperly secured litter attachment and the words hoist operator technique, and it replaces them with a material failure of the cable drum coupling. Part number VL4471, lot 09-114. I drove to Dayton, Ohio with a copy of it. Corinne Pike is 79. She has her daughter's jaw. She made me sit at a kitchen table under a wall of photographs, and she read those 2 pages twice, all the way through, moving her finger along the lines. Then she looked up at me, and she said the thing I had been running from for 14 years. You didn't answer my letters, I said. No, ma'am. I didn't. 3 of them. Yes, ma'am. She did not tell me it was all right, because it was not all right, and because she is not the kind of woman who hands out absolution to make a room more comfortable. She got up and poured coffee I did not ask for and set it in front of me, which is a different thing and, I have come to think, a bigger one. I took the titanium band off my finger and put it on the table. Naomi cut it out of a scrap coupon on a slow night at Bagram and told us it was stronger than we are, and it turned out that she was wrong about the metal and right about everything else. Corinne wears it on a chain now. I kept the watch. My mother called me once, about a year after the plea. She wanted to talk about the house in Erie and about whether I would be willing to make a statement clarifying that the family had always supported my service. Not sorry, clarifying. I said no, and she asked me what it was that I wanted from her, in a tired voice, like I had been asking for something enormous for decades. And I realized standing there in my kitchen that the honest answer had finally changed. Nothing, I said. That's the part that's different now. I did not hang up on her. I said goodbye like an adult, and I put the phone down and I went outside and cut the grass. And it was, I am not going to lie to you, the best hour of that entire year. There is one more thing. 8 months ago I got a letter from my niece Grace. She is 16. She wrote it by hand on notebook paper, which nobody her age does, and the first line was, "Nobody in this house will tell me what actually happened. So I am asking the one person who has never lied to me, even though we have only met 4 times." I wrote back. I told her everything in this story, in order, with the part about myself in it, the part where I let it stand for 14 years, because being the broken one was cheaper than being right. I am not going to pretend that fixed a family. It did not. My brother and I do not speak. My mother and I are finished, and I am not the one who ended it, and I have stopped needing everyone to know that. But there is a girl in Erie who now has a true version of her own last name, and she is going to be an adult someday, and she will not have to spend 14 years deciding whether she is crazy. I still work testing. I teach now, mostly, young officers who think the job is math. I tell them on the first day that the job is not math. Anybody can run the math. The job is being the one person in the room who is willing to say out loud that what just happened does not count. You do not need a star on your shoulder to do that. You do not need a clearance or a badge in a red sleeve or a general in a folding chair. You need a signature, and you need to be willing to sign it when the person on the other side of the table has your last name. If you made it this far, do one thing for me. Somebody watching this has been carrying a story their family wrote about them and has started to believe it is true. Tell them it is not, in the comments, in whatever words you would want somebody to use on you. And if you want more of these, subscribe, because I read every one of them. The knock was real. It was always real. It just took me 14 years to stop apologizing for hearing it.